Setting Up for DevOps Properly with Étienne Tremblay.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a full-service software architecture and engineering firm serving companies that are building mission-critical software systems. A quick announcement, we're into the second year, really a year and a half, of my architect forums. You can sign up for the next session. I'll put a link in the show notes. And an announcement in July, the architect forums have been so successful and well received that we are starting an executive software leadership forum. So if any of you listeners out there have a manager who you would love for that manager to be awesome and to be great at overseeing your software team, this may be the forum for them. It's meant specifically for executive level managers, senior manager, director, VP, CTO that are in the accountability chain for custom software systems. So I'll include links to those in the show notes. And for those who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, just go ahead and search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. So my guest today on the show is Étienne Tremblay, and he's the president of Tegaaa Solutions, a DevOps consulting firm. And he also helps clients achieve optimal performance and efficiency in their software development processes. With over 30 years of IT experience and 20 years in the Microsoft specialization, he has the skills and knowledge to provide tailored solutions for any DevOps challenge. He is passionate about sharing his expertise and best practices with the IT community. And as a Microsoft MVP for TFS and Azure DevOps since 2006, he's been a regular speaker at local technology conferences and user groups, starting out even as far back as 2005. And he also offers mentoring and training for organizations using Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server and Azure DevOps Server. And he designs enterprise and application architectures for projects of all sizes. His mission is to empower developers and organizations to leverage the power of DevOps and Azure to deliver high-quality software faster and better. Étienne, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you, Jeffrey. That's a great introduction. Hearing it from somebody else makes it, real. It's very interesting to hear somebody else describe your bio. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you've done a lot. I mean, honestly, you've done a whole.
I have. And it's interesting because I was at EDS in 2005. EDS being Ross Perot's company from your neck of the wood, if you remember, electronic data system. And I got a really fortuitous encounter in an elevator with somebody that told me, hey, there's a secret Top Gun program that you get to go to Seattle and talk with the Microsoft folks and kind of, join with the real intelligent people over there. So I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting. Can I sign up? And my boss wasn't aware of that. And I signed up and I got accepted to go there. And then I told my boss, hey, I got accepted to go there. She's like, what? You're not supposed to know about this thing. And I'm like, well, I met somebody that knew somebody that told me. And then that kind of kickstarted the whole journey with Azure DevOps and everything, TFS at the time, where I actually, when they went on stage at TechEd 2004, I think, with TFS the first time, they had installed TFS from DLLs, from copying files on those server to make them work, to make TFS work at the time. And it was, if you remember the Microsoft show where, there's always two people, like two videos where people are clicking around in the back where they do the same thing. So if somebody goes wrong, you can flip to the other video and, it doesn't really show. And so they had that 2 Dell servers that they had installed by hand with Elastic and everything just to make it work for the Tegaaa demo. And I got to have those 2 Dell server when I was in Seattle for this Top Gun program. And I actually virtualized those server with Virtual Server at the time. It wasn't called Hyper-V at the time. It was Virtual Server 2005. And they were like, nobody at Microsoft had been able to get an installation that worked. And they actually zipped and wrapped the 2 VMs, like the DB and the server. And then they gave that to all the Salesforce people at Microsoft to actually demo to their customer, because they needed an environment that worked, and that was the only one that worked. So that was my claim to fame. They had a thank you for Étienne Tremblay for doing that on a text file on the root of that directory of those VMs. So that was kind of neat.
Wow. Yeah, you were TFS before TFS was cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then it was funny because they went from Team Foundation Server to Visual Studio Team System to VA Visual Studio Team Services, and which was again VSTS, which was really confusing because it wasn't, people were looking on Google for things, they didn't get the same results. And then Azure DevOps, and it's been changing all over the place, but it's still near and dear to my heart. Most of my customers that I deal with are either they're mostly on Azure DevOps now. Like, nobody's still on TFS 2010, thank God, 14 years later. But they're mostly on either on-prem Azure DevOps 2019, maybe a little bit of 2020, not a lot of 2022, and obviously the service, the cloud is very, very used. So, and I do a lot of migration of customers from on-prem to cloud as well. So,
yeah. Well, I want to talk about your experience and your view of setting up a team properly with DevOps, but just going back, you started your career as a programmer, right? Just as as many of us start
Actually,
out.
I graduated in mechanical engineering in 92. I never worked in mechanical engineering ever. My last year of college was aerodynamics. So it was aeronautics, actually. It was like dealing with planes and stuff like that. So I specialized in that. And when I graduated here in Montreal, because I live in Montreal, here in Montreal, it was a big hub for planes and for all this kind of industry, kind of like Seattle with Boeing and everything. Like, Montreal is known because of Canadair, which is like the Air Canada branch and all that. And when I graduated, there was absolutely nothing. Everything was like, it was dead market. So EDS hired me back in 92. And then I went to Toronto for a while, like a year. And then I came back to Quebec and worked at the GM plant, because we had a GM car plant back then, which closed like in early 2000s. So I worked there, but I knew nothing about computers when I started at EDS. Well, I knew nothing. So my dad was very into PC. So I had a PC since 84, let's say, right? So I dabbled with that as just like at home, let's play games and stuff like that, right? But not as a career, and nowhere near knowing coding and all that stuff. So I had to learn all this stuff. When we were at the plant in GM, we did a lot of Unix stuff. So I learned a lot of Unix at the time. It wasn't called Linux back then. It was actually Unix back then. So I did a lot of Unix back then, and then kickstart into VB6, because VB6 was the hot thing end of the 90s. So I got into VB6. And then when .NET came along, I switched to .NET. And then, but as soon as Azure DevOps kind of came out, I more or less, I was still doing that before, but I was more like the guy that was setting up SSCS, or I was setting up VSS, or I was setting up like the version control stuff at the time, right? Like Agile didn't kind of come around until early 2000s. We were still doing Agile work. It wasn't called Agile back then, but it was still kind of Agile E, if you want. And so I was more the guy that was kind of setting up all that stuff, making sure everybody was doing version control, because I think that's very important when you work in a team to do version control. If you don't, then obviously all hell breaks loose. And I've seen version control based on hey, there's a folder on a share somewhere, all the way to, having some really CA harvest and all those other tools that, there's a ton of tools that did version control back in the early 2000s until it, now you can't talk about version control without talking about Git, right? Like Git is it. And like, no, I don't know that anybody's doing anything else than Git. Maybe still a little bit of TFSVC. I see still that around in companies that kind of started and kind of haven't moved, and their developers are shy or they don't really want to kind of do the jump into Git. Git's not super easy, but it is also very easy if you just use it very simply. I'm doing my work locally. I commit, I push to my remote, and if you just do that, and you do maybe a pull request where you say, hey, I'm not gonna push to master, or main, I'm gonna actually push to a branch, and I'm gonna bring my tool, my stuff back into master through a pull request. You explain that workflow, people kind of get it, and you don't need to go into any of the revert and all those things where, like, I want to do a rollback and no. Just pick a commit and do another branch, and like, don't do a rollback. You're just killing yourself. It's too complicated. People don't get it, and you get yourself like in bad places when you do that. Merging was and still is kind of the biggest problem. Like, people don't know how to merge anything. It's but hey, more job for me, right?
Sure. Well, so there's something about doing software well that drew you into it versus just developing the features. There's like, okay, work on a feature, and then there's the, hey, work on any feature and do it well. Like you mentioned, you were drawn to just setting up source control for the team, and now the DevOps space is so much more. There's so much more to set up, regardless of what you want to build.
Correct.
There is a certain environment. What is it about that drew you or pulled your interest?
That's a great question, and I like the way you're bringing it up. I think that I'm less interested in the product and more interested in the plant, right? The plant around the product. Like, how do we build that product? Like, let's build a plant with like a pizza stove, and how do we put our stuff on the pizza? It goes in the stove, comes out, it's all baked and everything's fine. I'm very interested in the process of building the pizza, but I don't care what's on the pizza, right? And you said it exactly right. I'm not like, you could build Node.js, Angular, .NET, PowerShell, whatever you want to build. I don't necessarily care what you want to build, but I want to help you build it the most efficiently possible, and with the most visibility into what you're building, so you understand what you're building. And if you need to put a little bit more salt or maybe some cheese here because you're missing some cheese, you know how to do that without breaking the process of making your pizza. You still can just add some different cheese because you want a different type of pizza. And that's what's great about all the tooling, whether it's GitHub, whether it's Azure DevOps, whether it's where you kind of specify through code what you want to build, and it's very prescribed. It's like a blueprint, right? Like the pizza, you build it by putting a layer of things on top of some bread, and then you put it in the oven, and you move it up to the line, and at the end, you get a pizza, right? So the dough, and you get the pizza at the end. So it's interesting to say, let's build the blueprint where you put your dough, you put your stuff on it, and all of that, which is really your pipeline, your YAML file, or whatever language you're using to build that. And then basically you're prescribing what the blueprint is. But you're saying, hey, if you want to add to that blueprint, just go ahead, like put some stuff here, but keep the foundation of the pizza. Don't mess with the foundation of the pizza. Yeah. But if you need to put some stuff on it, like, go ahead, do that, right? And do it here, right? This is where you want to put it. So helping those teams understand, and I love the aha moment where, I don't know how many times I go to customer and I say, so how do you like, what do you do when you're putting your stuff in production, right? And then they're like, I'm in Visual Studio and I hit publish. I'm like, okay, yeah, right, okay. So, and do you think that this is the right way to do it? And they're like, well, it's the only way I know how to do it, right? And then you're like, okay, but what happens if you have two other people that want to also push their stuff and they don't have your stuff? Like, what happens? Oh, we get into that all the time. I don't really know. It's stuff happens and we're always broken and we don't understand why, right? So it's like, okay. So let's move back, and look at like how you could do that better, and let's lay down the foundation of that blueprint that they want to do, building the thing, releasing the thing, and then explaining like, okay, maybe you want to do some testing in here, maybe just before, is the pizza cooked enough or is it still just too dry or not good enough, right? So it's like, okay, let's do some testing maybe before it goes to the customer, right? And that's what I really like, and I think that came from the engineering background, because I did like again I did my degree in mechanical engineering, so I like the process of things, right? As opposed to like building something. I love building things because that's what we do. We build software, right? But seeing the aha moment when you kind of explain the whole CI/CD thing is where I get my kind of there you go. Now they understand, right? And what's fun is that to me, it's really a low hanging fruit. It's not very hard to go to a customer and say, what do you do here? And, oh, you're using that tool, Azure DevOps, GitHub, whatever. Okay, so let's do a little blueprint. We're just going to build your thing. Same as you do right-click build in Visual Studio. We're going to build the thing. We're going to generate a zip file. And then we're going to push it to the thing. But we're going to do that through command line, right? Like we're just going to do it. And it's always going to be the same, right? And then let's just do that. And then you don't have to deploy it. The machine will do it for you, right? And then you show that and it's like, oh, wow, this is really neat, and some people understand that and already do that, which is fine. Then you go in and you refine the process. But a lot of people are just like, oh my God, I didn't even know our tool did that, right? Which is like, okay, that's why you hire me to show you that.
So fast forwarding all the way, Microsoft acquired GitHub, and then it was kind of all told, oh yeah, GitHub is going to be the DevOps tool, and we'll just kind of keep Azure DevOps going along. And then somewhere along the way, they started staffing up the Azure DevOps team again, realizing that, oh wait, no, Azure DevOps just keeps getting more and more customers. Maybe some migrated, but Azure DevOps is still growing just as fast as it ever has. Okay, I guess we're going to have two competing platforms into the sun. But from your experience, is there any rules of thumb where a team kind of maybe just implementing one, and maybe they don't forget the past inertia, let's say they don't have either one or something, and which ones where you say, oh yeah, go do all your automation with GitHub Actions versus, oh no, you do all your stuff in Azure DevOps? So are there any rules that you've kind of landed on in your opinion?
Yeah, the thing is again, you're very good at setting the table. I'm going to tell you that. So the thing is you said it right. They're actually two different products. And Microsoft acquired GitHub, and they decided or hoped that they could convert everybody that was in Azure DevOps to GitHub. The problem is they're not for the same audience, right? So GitHub kind of came around and is alive and well with open source project, which are very small, very direct, I have a repo, I'm building a component for NuGet, I'm building a component for NPM, I'm building a component for Maven, I'm building a component, whatever I'm building, right? Or I have a library, a DLL or something. I'm in that one repo, and I have people dialoguing with me, raising issue with my little product that I'm doing. GitHub is beautiful for that. It's a great model, works very well. It is not a model for enterprise. Enterprise work very differently, and whether it's good or bad, right? The thing is, Microsoft, as always, are competing against themselves, right? They do that all the time. And they have nurtured, they have taught, they have pushed, they have said to CIOs, CEOs, you want to be in TFS slash VSTS slash Azure DevOps because you want to create projects. You want to have work that you can follow across the project with multiple repos in that project, because you might have a website, some APIs, some DLLs, some other things. Don't put all these things in the same repo, put different repos for everything. So they've kind of taught, or like they really trained their people at Microsoft and the MVPs and their documentation. That's how you do scaled project, right? And they said use Azure DevOps for that, right? So now they say, okay, we bought for $7 billion GitHub, and we want to get our return, our ROI on this investment that we just made, right? But the problem is the way that GitHub works is very repo-centric. It's not organization-centric. It's built around a repo. And that doesn't work for the enterprise. Like, they have multiple repos, they have multiple work items, and all in the same project. And then we had this phase, if I'm sure you remember, mid 2015 maybe, where it was like one project to rule them all, where we said to corporation, to all our guys, create one project and put all your stuff in there, all your work, break it up in teams, put your hundreds and hundreds of repo under that same project, so security is easier and all of that. So now we have one project in Azure DevOps that has hundreds and hundreds of repos with thousands of work items. Even Microsoft works that way. And we're saying now you're going to flip over, and you're going to have one organization in GitHub that's going to have multiple. Their nomenclature is so confusing. When you go to GitHub, they have like the enterprise, the organization, and then you have multiple organization under an enterprise, and then each organization might have multiple repos, and then so an organization is like a team in Azure DevOps, but not really, because all the issues or all the work items, they're attached to a repo. They're not attached to an actual, project. So it's very difficult to tell the customer, well, hey, you want to do some enterprisey stuff, go to GitHub, right? I'm going to tell them use Azure DevOps. But if they're we want to have a presence on the internet. We want to have some people talking to us and telling us how our product's doing. We want to be like open source about it and all that. Then there's no qualms at all to say you're on GitHub and go on GitHub, right? Because that's the place to be. So again, I don't really have a rule of thumb, but most of the people I work with are enterprise, and the GitHub kind of paradigm, if you want, it just doesn't fit, because they were raised with Azure DevOps, which is not the same paradigm, right?
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast, or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
There's very key differences with how work is tracked. And then from the technical side of it, I think from the try to translate is that GitHub is very, very strong, where the production environment of what you've built is a package manager, and Azure DevOps is really strong, where the production environment is actually live site operations.
Correct. And like different servers that you're deploying
Mm-hmm.
to. And it might be Azure. You're deploying to Azure App Service or whatever, right? But you have like a lot of environments. You're managing environments. You're deploying to an environment. I'm not saying GitHub can't deploy to Azure and do all that. It can, and it does, right? Do all that stuff.
But it's optimized for the package manager deployments.
Right. And they don't have, unless I haven't looked lately, but I don't think they have an environment, like the concept of an environment in GitHub where and the concept being a virtual concept. Even in Azure DevOps, it's a virtual concept, right? I'm going to dev, I'm going to test, I'm going to prod. It doesn't mean anything, but your deployment actually targets something, and you can put security on these things and approval on these things and all these things that are not in GitHub currently, right? I'm not saying that it's not going to come, and Microsoft is very clear into, well, we're adding a lot of the features that are in Azure DevOps, we're backporting them into GitHub and I'm like, that's great. Once you have the nice red easy button from right, and I can click the easy button, and it's going to take all my Azure DevOps pipeline and translate them into GitHub Actions, which again is very interesting that they decided to create like YAML v2 for GitHub Action as opposed to just use the same YAML, because it's the same agents. It's exactly the same agents for both.
Right.
So it's like, why? I don't mind if they upgraded their YAML, let's say for Action, but then backported it to Azure DevOps saying, hey, update to a version 2 of the model, and that would be fine. But having two different model completely, again, is kind of like, why are you doing that? You started from nothing in GitHub. You could have just said, let's use the same thing. I understand the imperative, because I talked with Chris Patterson, and he was saying, we had to upgrade because the different things in the backends are not the same and blah, blah, blah. And I get that, right? But backport it to Azure DevOps at least to say, hey, if you want to use a V2 of the schema, you can, and we support it. If you still want to use V1 of the Azure DevOps schema, then do that as well, which is also fine, right? But we can't use the schema of GitHub Action in Azure DevOps because it's just not supported at all, right? Now they have to figure out, how do you migrate from one to another? How do like migrating work items is fine, right? Like most people could just extract the values and load them up into issues, and there's a JSON API to just extract things and create it on the other side. That's fine, but there's still not like a nice red easy button to say, I'm taking this, I'm going to GitHub, and then you're going to understand in GitHub how it works. Like, where am I putting all my work items? Are they in a repo? Are they loosely into an organization? But then what does it mean? Like, I know they're trying to add like a project hierarchy and things like that in the work items. It feels, I don't know, they're trying to come backport Azure DevOps into GitHub. And I don't know that they need to do that. Because like you said, right, they're two different products for two different audience. Enterprise, like the feel of Azure DevOps, the way you go in, it's very, very easy to attach Entra ID and get all your Entra ID in Azure DevOps. It's like just attach the Entra ID to your organization, you're done, right? Adding Entra ID to GitHub is like an ordeal, right? It's very complex, and it shouldn't be, but it is, right?
Well, let's talk about Azure DevOps and setting up that properly. And let's start with that. And that's an Entra ID. That even that term hasn't been around for a long time. So just quickly let us know. What the heck is that?
So Entra ID is the new name for Azure AD, right? So when they started Azure, they needed an Active Directory. So they called it Azure Active Directory because it was easy. So it was AAD. And that lasted until last year, I think, that they renamed it. So now it's called Entra ID, and it's still Azure AD.
It's exactly the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's just a new branding, right? It's called Entra ID. But the thing is when you create an Azure DevOps organization, whether you actually, let's look at Azure DevOps Server. When you install on-prem onto a server that's attached to a particular domain, an internal domain, all your user ID are your domain IDs, and no worries, all is good with the world. If you're going in the cloud, the problem is there's no AD in the cloud really, right? So how do you manage users there? So normally you would just add some emails, and then people would come in with their email and log in, and all was good. But then organization said, hey, wait a minute, like we want to make sure we control who's going in. It needs to be our people and not like just rando from the internet with the MSAs, right? Like Microsoft accounts. So we're going to let you attach an Entra ID to the org. And when you do that, then you're going to have a nice list of all your people that are in your Azure ID, which generally for most organization, the Azure ID is synced with their local Active Directory that they have on-prem. So then it's the same users and passwords and all of that. So when you go to the cloud, the Entra ID is the same users. So you get nice single sign-on, you log into your site, and all is transparent to you, whether you're in the cloud or you're on a server on-prem, right? So that's what Entra ID is.
Now, let's just focus on work items for now. When we talk about setting it up properly, unfortunately, I find there's a lot of clients that if you ask them, hey, do you have a record of everything, every bit of software work? And sometimes the answer is still no, or it's just haphazard. And in the past, there's been a focus on choosing your process template of Scrum or
Correct.
Agile or the basic template. But so if someone is just kind of setting things up and they just haven't been organized in the past, what are your favorite ways to do it today in 2024?
So I have one question. Basically, I sit down with them and I say, how do you work, right? Do you work where you have some task and you like to show something, whether it's a week, a month, 6 months, a year, for all I care? Hopefully not, but maybe. And then you kind of drive towards that end game, and then you kind of show something or you deliver something? Or is it more, I have a bunch of stuff that I need to do, and there's always new stuff that comes in, and I just want to have a way to have it, on a board that I can pick a task, do it, and then mark it done, and then pick another one, right? So obviously you see where I'm coming with this. You're either more on a Kanban kind of train, or you're on an agile or a board or a sprint kind of train,
based,
right?
Yeah.
Right? Iteration based, exactly. So based on their response, then I say, okay, so you want to deliver something towards a goal. So let's create. Do you have one team? Do you have multiple teams? If you have one team, then we create that one team. We create some. So your sprints or iteration, like you said, are they a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months? Like you tell me, right? And then we're going to create those. And then we're basically going, then I'm going to go into, okay, now let's talk about Agile in a very high level. So don't get me started on the Agile thing, right? Like for me, this is becoming a religion as opposed to a way of working. And I'm really not into because I see in a lot of organizations, those Agile coach coming in and telling like, that's how you need to do things. And like, as soon as it deviates from that, like I'm going to lose my job because you're not doing a retro or you're not doing, and it's become kind of like the priest that are going in and they're saying you need to have kids or else, and they go to the CIO of the company and then they say, you need to be agile. If you're not agile, you're not in the game, right? And it's like the whole point of the agility, or the whole spirit of the agility back in the early 2000s was very much that. It was a spirit of let's do that. And it's become a religion, and religions are not generally very good. Spirituality, like the spirit of things, is great, but religion sometimes just breaks things, right? So agility is kind of, but I do tell them, okay, here's how the product works. If you want to work with iterations, so Microsoft had this rule of thumb. If you want to use epics are like a year-long thing, right? So we have a work item type epic, and this is something you're going to do for the whole year. we are going to migrate from .NET 4.8 to .NET 8, right? All our applications. That's kind of an epic. It's just super long. There's going to be hundreds of applications that you're going to have to go through to do that. So this is not something you're going to, like all those little applications, you're going to have tasks to say, move to .8, move to .NET 8, but the whole the overarching thing of an epic is like, okay, this year we're gonna migrate to .NET 8, right? And then you have this concept of feature where it's more about 6 months, right? Something that's gonna last about 6 months, mark it as a feature, and then we have either PBI, product backlog items, or stories, which are equivalent. They're the same depending on which template you pick, right? And then those are more, make sure you can do it within your iteration. So however long your iteration is, make sure that the PBI/story you can do in one sprint, right?
And
then
some
tasks
terms.
are mostly it. Right?
So you're throwing around epic and feature, and feature is kind of a layman's term, but
Yes.
For the less than 10-year developers in the industry, they have no, it's like epic. Right. Why is it called epic? Wait, story. Because we have like the extreme programming terminology, then mixed in with the Scrum terminology, and now the products have like some of one, some of another. So did you decipher that for us?
Even has, so in Azure DevOps, there's even a template called Simple, I think, right now, which does
Basic.
task. Yeah, basic. That's right. So basic is, I think there's just task in there, right?
Issues
I
and
don't even
tasks.
think there's issues and tasks. That's right. So so it's just, I have stuff to do and I'm going to do it, right? Most of the people I work with have been drinking the Agile Kool-Aid, right? So because they drank the Agile Kool-Aid, whether it's Scrum or Agile or whatever, they understand those words that I was throwing around, like epic and feature and PBI and all that. I understand that, like you said, the less than 15, 20 years of development may not have heard those terminologies before, and then it's like, but the intent is,
it's worth saying that extreme programming started calling things user stories, and of course Scrum called them backlog items, and then a bigger thing, greater than a story, was an epic. So that's kind of how it came about, and that now I guess it's stuck, huh? It's stuck.
Yeah, it's stuck, and the product supports it. So people that kind of understand it kind of do that. So I either funnel them, to get back to your question, I either funnel them into the agile verbiage and way of working with iterations and tasks and epics and
stories,
all these things, or I move them to the Kanban way of working, where it's more about, let's put some items, we're going to call them again PBI or user stories, at the level we can look at epic, we can look at tasks, we can look at all those levels as well. But most people, when they work in Kanban, they kind of stay on the PBI/story level, and basically just create them, and you either add task if you want or not, and you pick it, you put it in a lane. So there's the way that Kanban works is, it works, as opposed to working in number of days, they work in lanes. So you have a lane that says started, then they have a lane that says I'm done, can you test it? Then I have a lane that says I'm done, right? So then you kind of create that done list. Like what does done mean, right? And then you have that list of, well, to be done, you need to have this. You have to have tests done. You have to whatever. And then when it's done, you can put it to the done column. So essentially, those columns have what they call work in progress count, right? So each column can only have so this is when you're very prescribed, right? Each of those columns can only have a specific amount of items in them. And then if you want to add another one, you need to remove one in the next column, right? And the idea is, all of this came out of car plants, where you from Japan, right? Kanban came up from Toyota in Japan, and essentially what it was used for was all the segments of the plant line when cars are being built, right? And you've seen some videos of that. I'm sure you can look online to see any kind of video on a car plant, right? All the cars are kind of stacked one behind another, and they kind of go up one station. Somebody puts 4 screws, and it goes up another station. Somebody puts a door, and then goes up another station. Somebody puts the windshield, and so it's not one car that's being built in one place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a plant, and it kind of moves along. So the Kanban concept was, well, we're, instead of having one continuous line, we're going to have 15 little lines that are all connected to each other, but we're going to have a buffer zone that, let's say there's 15 cars in one segment. In each segment, there's 15 cars, but there's a 6-car gap like in between those lanes. So if you have an issue, you pull a card and you say, hey, I have an issue. And then you have the SWAT team that comes in and helps you fix the car.
The line.
You stop the line, you fix the car, and then you restart the line. But you're not stopping the rest of the stuff. You're just stopping your little bit. So kind of that's stuck into how Kanban's kind of being displayed, where you have a specific number, a maximum number of items that you're putting in a particular column, which is like the maximum number of car on that little segment, right? And then if you want to put another car in there, you need to remove a car, right? You can't put more, it just doesn't fit. So obviously Azure DevOps doesn't stop you from putting more cars, right? It's gonna tell you, hey, you're overflowing by X number of cars, but it's going to let you do it, right? But if you're very prescribed and hey, we want to use Kanban the right way, then you should kind of stop and say, okay, why are we overflowing this thing? That means we're probably not testing our stuff because we're just adding new things that we built. And then the column that says, hey, I'm ready to test, nobody's testing. So why is that, right? So then you should stop and ask yourself, oh, well, maybe we either need a tester or maybe I need to go test stuff while we're still developing so we can close things. Because the idea is the more you pack in things and you never close anything, then what's the point, right? So you want to basically have work and move it along the line so that you can, at the end, you have a finished car, all nice and beautiful, that you can sell to a customer, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the Kanban kind of part. So when I sit down with customers, I kind of look at the way they work. I ask a couple of questions, see how they work. And sometimes it's a mix of both, right? Because they have kind of a team that receives phone calls and they just need to fix a problem, right? They're the first line of support. So, hey, well, use Kanban, right? Like add the thing, fix it, done, next one, right? And sometimes I use Kanban as well as a technical debt kind of bucket, where I tell the teams, put all your technical debt in that particular board. And each sprint, because let's say they work in sprint, each sprint, take one of your guys, rotate, not the same guy all the time, rotate and put him on a technical debt duty, right? Like fix things. You're not building any features. You're just going in and you're fixing technical debt. That's your job for the next sprint, mm-hmm. whether it's 2 weeks, a month, whatever. And I push on the rotation part of it because it could be very boring to fix technical debt, obviously, right? So if it's always the same guy that does that, at one point you're like, okay, I'm done, right? I don't like doing that. But if you flip around, then also the people that are fixing technical debt, notice that when they're developing stuff, they're adding to the technical debt as well when they're doing stuff wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And it's teaching them as well to say, oh, yeah, maybe I should do better next time when I'm doing my feature, so it doesn't accrue a technical debt, right? So that's kind of a little bit of a setup that I kind of put teams through. But yeah, that works really well usually.
Okay. Now, as we kind of close up here, I mean, we could talk for several hours on setting up all the different parts of it. Yep. But as we close up, with the modern organization of Azure DevOps services, with the repos and the boards and the test plans, artifacts, and pipeline, do you find yourself always using all 5 modules, or is there a sequence that you tend to implement things? How do you look at that when you look at the 5 different parts that they kind of sort of split up the UI into?
It's interesting because I started mentoring a company here in Quebec about 6 months ago, and they were like, we have an org. We don't know nothing, right? So it was very interesting to just come in and say, and they were very humble about, Laura, we don't really know how to do this.
Yeah.
How can you help us out, right? So we went through that conversation of, okay, how do you work? How do you want to work? All of that. So that was helpful. And we started because he had no visibility into anything. People were doing stuff. And at the end of the month, he was like, okay, so what did we do? Nobody knew because nobody was writing anything down, and they were just committing things, and that's it. So he was very interested in the work item on, okay, telling people. And I told him, hey, start simple, do PBIs, don't do tasks, just do product backlog item, and tell people, okay, this is what you need to do. When you're done, close it, right? Just that. So, and then people started to see, oh, I can add task under this. Oh, that's cool. My to-do list of what I need to do. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll use that, right? And then some people don't care about that, developers, right? And some do. So it was like, well, the feature's there, use it or don't. It's not really a big deal. And then from there, it was like, okay, so each developer was having one repo, and they were building their stuff to just push it to Azure. I'm like, okay, we're not going to do that through Visual Studio. I mean, right? So we're not going to do that. We're going to start adding pipelines, and I'm going to show you how that works. And they were also in Azure clicking around, creating their resource, right? So I've said, okay, we're going to stop this. We're going to start using Bicep or ARM, Azure
Resource Manager.
Resource Manager. Thank you. To basically, this is. Right now I'm telling people, don't use raw ARM, right? Use Bicep, which is kind of like the layer on top, as TypeScript is a layer on top of JavaScript. Well, Bicep is the layer on top of ARM, right? So do your Bicep script, and we're basically going to deploy that, and it's going to create always the same thing going from dev to test to prod. You're recreating the same environment, so you can basically check, is everything okay in each environment? So we started doing that, and he was like blown away by, wow, now I have control. I know what's being compiled. I know when it's being compiled. I can approve when it goes to production, because you can put approval gate on your pipelines and stuff. So this is what they were, I'm going to use air quotes here, good enough with repos. Didn't really have to go into that. They knew they use Git and all of that. So that was fine. So they haven't started using test cases yet, because they were so far behind that it was like, okay, let's just make sure we kind of make sure you have the basis here. Artifacts is a concept that a lot of folks have no clue. NuGet and, all these things is very, this is like next level engineering. When you start doing that, then they're like, oh, okay, we're doing components, we're reusing again, in multiple things. Let's do a NuGet component, or let's consume this and all of that. That's very different. So they haven't looked at artifacts at all. So those are kind of the two things that are kind of on the docket to kind of look at. But they are using, I created a dashboard for him to see like how things are moving along. So he's very happy about the dashboard. So we're using that. We're using work item. We're using, obviously, repos, and we're using templates for pipelines, right? Because those are kind of low-hanging fruit. They're very easy to implement, and you get a lot of return on your investment by just doing that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that by doing this, then they're like, okay, now I want to go deeper. I want to do more, right? Because I want to have more control. I want to like add some tests to this thing. I want to do like NuGet and all those other things. So yeah, it's interesting. You start them, you give them the Kool-Aid a little bit, like the little push a drug, and then they're like, oh yeah, we love that. Let's do more, right? So yeah, that's that.
Push a drug. You mean you give them a little bacon? Hey, I want more.
Yes.
Have some
good old bacon. Canadian bacon.
Awesome. Well, I know we've only scratched the surface, but as we kind of wrap up here, for people who are just trying to figure out how to implement Azure DevOps for the first time, are there any tutorials or online resources that are your favorites that you might point them
to? Funny enough, Jeffrey, the Microsoft Learn site these days is very good. I mean, it didn't used to be good, But now it's very good. If you go in and you go to the learnmicrosoft.com and look for Azure DevOps in there, all the subjects on all the little intricacies of how to build a pipeline, how to do templates in pipeline, how to set up variables, how to create your first layer of iterations and teams when you want to work with work items and all that. It's very there's nice pictures. It's very well documented. So I would tell people to go there. I mean, I didn't used to tell people to go to the Microsoft site for how to learn things, but their Learn site as especially for Azure DevOps anyway is very good. I like it. I do go there and read new stuff once in a while to see how things are going, and their REST API is very well documented as well on Learn. So yeah, I push people there. And then there's obviously, all the influencer that talk about things and have nice videos on YouTube about different functionality. I do some videos, haven't done in a while. I need to get back into this and do some videos I haven't done in a while. But yeah, I really like to show people how to, make things work. And I think that that's the next steps for me for sure.
Awesome. Well, Étienne, I really appreciate you coming on the Azure DevOps podcast and sharing with us about Azure DevOps and your long career, kind of going through it all. And that is experience that is going to save some people who are newer in these particular tasks, save them a lot of time. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure, Jeffrey. Anytime.
Oh, my pleasure indeed. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.